This is Grace Notes. I'm Alan Button, and really pleased today to have a very special guest, Mary Latham. Mary, as some of you may know, was our very first guest on Grace Notes some 3 years ago. Mary is a 2009 graduate of Stonehill College, and Mary, you correct me if I'm wrong, and tell you what, let me say welcome first, and then you can do your correcting. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It's really our pleasure, our privilege. Mary, as I recall, you were doing some work in Manhattan some 3 or more years ago with a little wedding photography business on the side before you started a great adventure. Have I got that right?
Yes, a little bit more than 3 years. But yes, I was in New York and before I started this trip.
I'll tell you what, Mary, for those of our listeners who may have hazy recollections or maybe have never heard your story, tell us what this trip is, what it was. Tell us what you've been about.
That's true, what it was now. So this journey began in 2016. I got into my mom's old Subaru and decided to drive across the country to every single state and compile stories of acts of human kindness. My mom passed away from cancer in 2013, and she always reminded me that there would always be tragedies and horrible things out in the world, but there would always be more good out there if I looked for it. So I called the trip More Good, and I decided I was going to create a book for hospital waiting rooms that I could put in those rooms because I spent so much time in them myself with her sickness. And I thought people could use some hope and inspiration in those rooms. So for the past 3 years, I've hit all 50 states and compiled stories to now start my book with.
Speaking of all 50 states, Mary, we actually were talking about our upcoming conversation with you here at the station a week or two ago, and somebody asked, well, how did she get to Hawaii? Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We figured you didn't drive there.
No, yeah, couldn't take the car there. For Alaska and Hawaii, they were my last two states. Obviously, New York was technically the end because I drove through it, it's where I live. But Alaska and Hawaii were the last two. And for those two states, Hawaii, the independent dealership of Subaru there, it's like a couple different cars, but one of them is Subaru. They had reached out to me about, almost a year ago, and they had seen an article done on me, and they said, we'd love to help you when you get here. You know, we can give you a rental and help you get around to get your stories. So when I flew into Hawaii, someone picked me up and gave me the keys to a Subaru there to drive around that island, and then I would fly to the next island, and they would do the same thing. And by the third island, they usually would bring me to the little office. I'd sign some paperwork. But by the third one, I walked out of the airport. I put my bag in the car, and I got in the passenger seat. And then the guy walked around and said, what are you doing? He was giving me the keys. And I said, I thought you would have to drive me to sign the papers. He's like, no, it's all yours. And my friend followed me, so I'm going to jump in his car. And off I went right from the airport. So they were amazing there. And I talked to their company and chatted with them about my project on the last day of my visit. But in Alaska, it was really cool because they were also going to help me out there and give me a rental, but they didn't have a blue Subaru Outback, which was kind of what my theme has been in my mom's car. Uh-huh. And so I landed into Anchorage, Alaska, and the service manager there picked me up and then brought me back to his work and then just gave me his keys because he had a blue Subaru Outback. It was his family car. And he just gave it to me to use for 2 weeks, over 1,000 miles across Alaska. And then I drove it back, and he dropped me back at the airport. So it was his personal car, so it was even cooler. But yeah, it was. So that's how I was able to do those two states.
That's terrific. I actually watched the video that I guess CNN and Subaru collaborated on in telling part of your story.
Yes.
I saw the picture of your mom's Subaru. You've got it covered with stickers of various kinds from all over the place.
Yes, yeah, I have a sticker for every state I've done. I tried to keep it just to that. There's one or two extra stickers on there, but mostly I tried to keep it to just states. And it was very cool because the connection with the Subaru dealership didn't come until really the last few states of my journey. And they were very, very awesome. It's an amazing company, and they were just very respectful. I didn't want a sponsorship, and I didn't want the trip to be taken over now that I had done it all on my own this whole time, and it was sponsored by everyone and all of human kindness. I didn't want to put a corporate stamp on it. And so they were really, they helped in small little ways, but very personally. The vice president hosted me in his home. The president took me to lunch. Like, it wasn't Subaru did this. It was the specific people that helped me out with little things, but they were just very, very cool about keeping my journey authentic, because that was really important to me.
Well, I can see it. It fit in just wonderfully with what your trip was all about. Speaking of things on display, I saw too in the video that you were wearing a T-shirt that said "More Good," and I gather that was something that was true throughout your trip, wearing a T-shirt like that.
Yes, yeah, I was wearing it when I came to see you guys back years ago now.
I had forgotten that.
Yeah, that was my uniform. That was the uniform. I would wear a pair of jeans and black Converses and a More Good T-shirt or sweatshirt, depending on the weather, every day of the journey. So I just had a bunch of shirts in the back of my car. It helped with my budget. Also, you really never had time for anything, let alone figuring out what you would wear, so that made it easy.
Well, I want to come back in a couple of minutes, Mary, to some of your experiences specifically. Before we do that, though, tell us about this first song that we're going to hear. And I might say, by the way, that we have continued with the approach for these 3 or so years since you were our first guest of having about 3 songs in Grace Notes chosen by our guests. And it's because so much of the music that we listen to fits in with the stories of our lives. And I was listening to the first part of our first interview with you, because we post these Grace Notes episodes on our website, and I had mentioned in that first Grace Notes episode that we here for Grace Notes, like Grace Notes in music scores, focus on people, bring in as guests for Grace Notes people who brighten the lives of others, just like Grace Notes do in music scores. They embellish, brighten, enrich the lives of those around them. And you, as our first guest, were doing that, are doing that, and have for 3 years been doing that, and met a lot of people who are doing the same thing. So we want to hear a little bit more about that in just a couple of minutes.
I always love the title of your thing, Grace Notes. My mom was very musical, so I feel like she would have loved it.
Very good. Tell us about John Denver's Take Me Home Country Roads.
Well, John Denver was just the best, and that song is the best. So it was obviously going to be a classic on my road trip, but I kind of almost kept it for when I finally hit West Virginia. It was like a little present for myself, okay, now I'm going to blast this song every day, 10 times a day. But West Virginia was, I think, maybe state 44 or 43. It was really getting close to the end there.
So it was on your way. It was on your way back east.
Yes, I was finally turning and going east after West Virginia. I started heading towards Long Island more. I went through Maryland and then started going up towards Long Island. And I knew that moment, I knew that I was going to start finally heading home. So it was kind of perfect, even more so, to have this song playing, just because, I'm driving through all of these country roads and finally, heading home. And I think that when I began my journey, home was a place that just was where my mom wasn't anymore. And so it was really hard for me to go there. It was, and not be sad. And I tried to avoid it as much as I could. I was always leaving. And, after she passed away. And so I think that finally with this road trip, it gave me so much peace to be able to go home, and be able to know that she was there in the way that she was going to be there now, just in in my family, and all of the nieces and nephews that I had one niece when I started. Now I have 7 nieces and nephews getting off the road.
Wow.
You know, there's just so much more family now. So that was how she was going to appear for me. And so I think when I made peace with that, it helped. And it was just, you know, obviously the whole lyrics with Country Roads, take me home to the place I belong. I think that it was just, I just loved it. And it was just like a happy song for me. Like, okay, we're doing it. Like, we're almost done. It's a miracle.
Neat. Very good. What was your mother's name?
Patricia.
Patricia. Very good. Mm-hmm. Let's hear the song, Take Me Home, Country Roads by John Denver.
Almost heaven. Take me home, country roads.
That was Take Me Home, Country Roads by John Denver. If you're just joining us, our guest today is Mary Latham. Mary having been our first guest on Grace Notes some 3 years ago. Mary, let's pick up, if we could, with some of what you experienced on this trip. Were you keeping count of how many people's homes you stayed in?
That was one of the few things that I was able to keep count of. But yes, I ended up being in 154 homes.
154, and these were strangers, I gather.
I would say 80%. There was always a few here and there that were maybe a fourth cousin that I hadn't seen and since I was 3 years old, or you know, a friend of a friend who maybe I had met for 2 days of my life 5 years ago. You know, there might have been a little bit of a connection with some of them, but the majority were definitely people that reached out via news media or local papers or from the social media pages that just liked my project and wanted to be a part of it.
I see. So you had some means by which they could get in touch with you because they wanted to be a part of what you were doing and be supportive.
Exactly. And like I said, I always wore my More Good T-shirt, so that helped because, you know, I was in Oklahoma and wearing my T-shirt in a coffee shop, and a girl walked over and said, "I like your shirt." And I told her what it was, and she said, "Oh my gosh, my best friend in Colorado would love this, and you should definitely connect with her because she would host you." And then I did. And we stayed together. So it's like random connection.
Yeah, and one person led to another.
Yeah.
How many miles did you put on the Subaru?
So I started to lose track, but I know that I hit 43,000.
Wow. 43,000.
Somewhere a little bit over that, yeah.
154 homes. What an adventure. Can you give us one or two examples of some of what you ran into that maybe typify the stories that you heard? I'd be interested in hearing just any particular story or stories that maybe made a special impression or a typical impression on you.
Yeah, I would say there was a range of 3 different types of stories, and I can give you one from each range.
Great.
There was the smaller stories that were more so, and one of my absolutely favorite stories, and I had this story before I had met you, so I'm not sure if I had ever talked about it, but it stuck with me the entire trip. It was from my second state, which was Rhode Island, and it was a woman who was a bank teller, and she, you know, back in her 20s, and she was working one day, and she was having a really bad day at work, and, you know, it was visible on her face that she had been upset. And another customer came in and was withdrawing money, and she looked up at the bank teller and said, "You know, are you okay? You look like you're having a hard day. Is there anything I can do for you?" And the bank teller was super embarrassed. She was just like, you know, "Oh no, there's nothing some peanut M&Ms won't fix when I get out of work later," and made a weird joke, and they laughed, and the customer left. And then 30 minutes later, the customer came back in and slid a bag of peanut M&Ms under her window and walked back out. She never saw her again, told her kids and her grandkids, and she was telling me this story 30 years later. And it was such a cool thing. I mean, you know, it was a bag of M&Ms. But when I started the trip, I thought, oh, well, maybe the girl was upset because she stubbed her toe, or she, you know, her boyfriend broke up with her or something. And now, after speaking with hundreds and thousands of people across our country, it's like she could have been diagnosed with cancer that week. Her uncle could have died in a car crash that day. Like, you know, that you never know what's going on in people's lives, and usually they're going through some type of tragedy. So to just know that that bag of M&Ms some stranger got her impacted her that much and made such a difference in her life is so cool, because that's something we can all do. Maybe we can't donate a kidney or something, but we can definitely take a few minutes out of our time to give it to someone else.
It reminds me of what people say about the impact that just a smile can have on another person, or calling another person just by his or her name.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely it's really amazing what these, like, some of the smallest things people would tell me about just how much. And it was always in that moment, like whatever. And she never told me. I had never found out what she was going through. But with some people that tell me that, yes, someone held a door or this or that, it was like in the most critical moment, they were maybe suicidal that day, or, like whatever was going on in their life. That act of kindness is what gave them a little hope and put them back on a different track. And so that was really cool. The second type of story was those crazy angels that are walking around Earth donating organs to other people. I met these two girls in Chicago who their father had kidney problems his whole life and was always very, very sick. And then when the girls were in their teen years and they had a brother, the brother donated his kidney to their dad. And so his quality of life just did a 180. I mean, he was doing amazing. He was able to go outside, play catch with them, like just do things that he was never able to do. And he had that for 8 years, and then he got sick again, and he wasn't able to do the surgery, and so he ended up passing away. But because those two sisters saw how much a difference their brother made when he gave the kidney and how much it helped them, they wanted to do that for someone else. And so both sisters, 24 and 25, donated a kidney to a total stranger and, in honor of their dad. And I got to be in the hospital. I was in Chicago on that day when one of the second sister was donating, and they invited me right into the hospital. I went, I got a connection to them from like a friend of a friend of a friend. It was just one of those random things where I sent them a text and said, "Hey, I heard you had a good story. I'd love to chat with you guys." And she was like, my sister just got out of surgery, but we're here if you want to come by. So I went. I was me and the two girls and their brother and their mom, and we were all sitting in the hospital together. And it was so cool, because it's like I'm not just sitting and hearing their story over the phone. I was really getting to be in the hospital with them at probably one of the most beautiful days of their life. I mean, they saved 2 lives and more, actually, because it became part of a kidney chain. So I think there was like 6 or 7 people involved. It was amazing.
You were living it with them.
I was, which was a big part of the whole journey. I think a lot of the stories, it wasn't that, when I started the journey, it was in New York, and I would just collect stories via email and I would post them on a website. And to be in these people's homes and really see what they were going through in their lives, and just, the whole backstory, and not just the cute little picture of the mom and the son in a sweet little outfit, but really see what their lives were like and how they got through their day to day, made it so much more important to me to be able to tell their story, and also just to make them realize, I will drive an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours off of my route to get to them and to hear their story because of how important I think they are. And so to let them feel that importance too was cool. Your kidney donation story reminds me too of how true it is that doing good is contagious. And putting myself in the role of observing somebody else doing good, I know that I'm encouraged to think about doing good being better if I see somebody else doing that. Yes, it is definitely contagious. I think that, when people are witness to the good that's going on, when they're not so distracted, because we're all so distracted, then they want to do something too, and they want to just be part of that positiveness. We need that right now.
Yep. You have a third category.
Yeah, so my third category is more of my, I lied. There's 4 categories.
Okay.
But my third category is more based on the tragedy, which is the families that lost their child and then started some type of scholarship or nonprofit or something to help other families that would go through what they went through next. And so that was very emotional. I'm not a licensed therapist, and so I kind of felt like I was one going through the country. I was more of an unlicensed therapist, thinking I was one, and trying to sit with these families and hear their stories. And I was, I didn't know how to set up boundaries. I didn't know how to not take it in. So it took a very large toll on my physical health just because of the way it emotionally manifested in my body. But I think that it was so important to me because, again, these families have been through so much when they lose a child. And then for them to immediately turn around and figure out, how are we going to help the next person that has to go through this? It was just so inspiring. I mean, I thought the stories would be more so, getting stories like the coffee one or the peanut M&M one and, happy little moments. But these stories are just as important to know, yes, this family went through something horrific and tragic and very sad, but this is how they picked themselves up to keep going. You don't ever get over it, but this is how they kind of took a step forward and kept their, son's name alive or daughter's name alive. And, sent a bunch of kids off to college that would have never been able to afford it. And now they stay in touch with these children and the kids come to visit them on holidays. And so I think when people are sitting in a hospital waiting room, yes, it would be lovely to read a couple happy stories, but I think it's really important for them to be able to connect. If you're sitting in a waiting room, you're inevitably going through something tragic yourself. And so to know, oh, there's this family in Kentucky that went through something so similar and this is what they did. And they're still here and they're still able to get up every morning and move forward. And so just to have that type of inspiration, I thought would be really helpful. So I collected a lot of those types of stories too, which were very emotional, but really beautiful.
Tell you what, Mary, we didn't plan this, but it seems to me that this might be a good place to go to that next song that you've selected. And then why don't we do that and then come back to the fourth category?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, tell us about Don't Give Up on Me.
So the song, it's by Andy Grammer, and it was just a song that kind of got popular in the last few months, and he had just written it, and I would hear it on the radio, and I feel like it was the perfect song because I think a lot of people talked about getting to the finish line and what are you going to feel like on that last day and what is that moment going to feel like? And it wasn't really about that. Even that last day, I felt like it was such a blur and I was so overwhelmed that I didn't really get to process it. I think it was just about the consistency of the entire journey, every single day of 3 years and 31 days of trying to do this mission and not giving up. So I feel like that whole concept of that's the win, that you never gave up. It's not about the ending moment. It's about the whole journey. And so I just really love that song, and all the lyrics in it are so applicable about just, there's going to be people in the world that aren't going to believe there's more good out there, or there's going to be naysayers, or there's going to be negative people, but, you can change perspective and you can keep going forward and help the people that do believe in what you're doing, and you just can't ever give up on it. You have to keep putting that positive out into the world, no matter how hard it is.
Another reason that it occurred to me that the song might be appropriate after you were talking about that third category is apparently it is a song that was featured on the soundtrack of a movie, 5 Feet Apart, that tells the story of two teenagers with cystic fibrosis who fall in love.
Yes, I can't even watch that. I feel like I'll probably cry the whole time.
and I haven't seen the movie, but that description certainly said something about the value of not giving up on somebody and how special it is not to be given up on by others. Let's hear the song, Don't Give Up on Me, by Andy Grammer.
I will fight for you. I always do until my heart is black and blue.
That was Don't Give Up on Me by Andy Grammer. Mary, you were saying before we started our session here, we were talking, you mentioned the CNN Hero event. Tell us about that.
Yes, so that was a very cool event that I was lucky enough to attend because Subaru had an extra ticket, and they figured since it was so on the same wavelength of what I had done and what I was doing, featuring these different people that were making changes in the world, they would invite me. And so it was 10 different people that were making a difference in the world, and they were all getting highlighted, and then they pick one main hero of the year. And it was an event in the Museum of Natural History in New York, and it was just, in the whale room. It was so beautiful. I'd never been in that room, even though I lived in New York for so many years. And they had, at the end, kind of this montage of different video clips of all of the people and the help that they were doing. And it was just so beautiful. And during the whole montage, Andy Grammer himself and the PS22 kids from Staten Island were all singing that song.
PS22 being Public School 22.
I believe that's their name, but now I'm nervous that that's not exact. But
okay.
I think it is.
That's all right.
It's a group from Staten Island.
Good.
That is this amazing singing group. And so they sang it with Andy Grammer. And yes, it's definitely PS22. And it was just the most beautiful thing. And someone next to me leaned over and was just like, they were crying and they were just like, this is so beautiful. And I said, this is how I have felt every day. Like listening to songs like this in the car and then meeting people like this that are making all these changes despite whatever, hard things they went through. It was just like, this is how I always feel. Crying all the time like a sad Sarah McLachlan commercial driving down the road.
Tell us about that fourth category, Mary.
Yes, the fourth category was my personal fuel, but also amazing stories. It was people that went through personal tragedies, physically kind of almost. Or, there was a woman that I met when I was in Kansas. She had walked into a phone store at the wrong time, and it was being robbed. And she got shot 3 times by the robber, and she was in the hospital for about 145 days. And when she finally got out, because of the complications during her surgeries, it was a miracle she was even alive. But when she finally got out, she had no arms from her elbows down and no legs from her knees down. And she got home, and she was home for a few days. She went back to the hospital for a checkup and was diagnosed with breast cancer. And her story was about a man who heard her speak and knew she was struggling with insurance, because on top of going through all of that, she couldn't get insurance to cover mechanical arms. And so she had gotten her mechanical legs, but she couldn't get her arms. And a millionaire that had heard her speak ended up buying her the arms. They were like $275,000. And he ended up delivering them to her a little bit before Christmas. And so that was her story about someone doing an act of kindness for her. But to me, she was the story. I mean, she was this beautiful, amazing woman. She had done her hair that morning. It looked 10 times better than I could do myself. And she doesn't even have arms. And she, was just so independent and so amazing. And she told me that when she got home after that first chemo treatment and she was laying on her couch, she thought to herself, I could just give up right now. I could pull this sheet over my head with my half a limb and give up, or I can buck up and make the best of this, and I can try to inspire other people and help them that have to go through it next. And so she goes into hospitals around Kansas if they've been diagnosed with something and they're going to lose a limb, or they've already lost a limb unexpectedly, and she sits with them and she talks to them and helps them go through it. So I left her house in Wichita, Kansas, and drove about 3 hours that day to Kansas City, Missouri, and I probably cried the entire way. I couldn't imagine that much happening to one person and them still getting up and barreling through life and just figuring out how they're going to help other people. And I think, that was kind of the message with everyone on the journey. It's the only way that we're really going to heal ourselves and cope and get through life in general is by helping others.
Well, Mary, it sounds like you've got great material for the book that you set out to put together. How's the book coming? It hasn't started. Uh-huh.
It's
You're still sort of recovering, I assume. Yep.
I kind of am. Yeah, I do feel like I just got home from war, and I'm in a little bit of shell shock right now.
When did you get home?
So I got home November 30th.
Uh-huh.
And probably a month of it has been filled with travel. I had to go to Florida, I had to go to Texas, I had to go to the city, just a couple of different speaking events and meetings that I had to do follow-ups with. And so I haven't really been that still.
Uh-huh.
And now I'm moving again. So, but I think that, it will come together. I needed a moment. I did do little writings and on my Facebook page and my website, there's stories, but mostly I was with strangers all the time. So it was just impossible to get any writing done. And also you didn't want to excuse yourself and go upstairs and write when downstairs could be a person you might never see again in your life with a great story. So I just gave all my time to my hosts and the people I met and figured the writing would come later.
Well, with 3 years and all that you've been through, seen, and heard, you've got a huge amount to process, no doubt.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Mary, we've got to wrap things up here time-wise, so tell you what, let's talk about this third song that you've selected, one that takes us a little bit outside our usual playlist, a song by Ozzy Osbourne, renowned heavy metalist.
So, for this song, I feel like it's the least Ozzy-esque that it could be. I always loved to hear Ozzy Osbourne and think about my brother when I was he was in high school and I was still in elementary school, and he would always be blasting that in his room. So it was that comforting thought. But mostly this song, it was just perfect for that moment, because it was the song I chose for my last mile of my journey, driving across a road called the Causeway in Orient, New York, where I would be then back in my hometown finally. And, kind of singing the lyrics, "Mama, I'm coming home." And even the beginning of this song where it says, "Times have changed and times are strange. Here I come, but I ain't the same." I think that really resonated, because one of the hardest things about the journey was the balance. And, hearing these stories and taking all of this in different areas of the country and seeing what they go through, and then coming home and photographing a wedding of a girl in a $10,000 dress and complaining about how her pedicure chipped. So I think learning the balance of just knowing everyone has their problems. Their problems are all, their problems, and that's valid. And it doesn't mean that they haven't gone through other really traumatic things, but in this moment, their problem is whatever their problem is, and just accepting that and not trying to always compare different silly things. Oh, well, that seems so trivial, when you don't know everyone's story. So I think that I just changed so much as a person on the journey. And so this song just really resonated with me, and it was such a good song to blast in my last mile.
And obviously, lest anybody miss it, the reference to Mama in the title, "Mama, I'm Coming Home," and in the lyrics, takes you full circle back to the inspiration that your mother provided to get all this started.
Yeah.
Mary, it's been a real treat to catch up with you. We look forward to hearing at some point how the book comes together, and wish you well as you continue to process things and move on to the next 3 years of your life. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Alan. It was really nice to talk with you again.
Let's hear the song, "Mama, I'm Coming Home" by Ozzy Osbourne.
Times have changed and times are strange. Here I come, but I ain't the same. Mama,